Hello and welcome to We Draw More. My name is Phil and I'm here to invite you on a journey as I go through my thoughts on upgrading the Peace Offering Precon featuring Ms. Bumbleflower as its commander. A quick word on budget. I'm a very budget conscious player, so while I didn't set a specific upgrade budget for this build, the final deck shows an architect as being €83 or just over 96 US dollars. Let's take a look at Ms. Bumbleflower herself. She's a 1/5 rabbit citizen with vigilance and has the following ability. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. Let's break this down a little. When you cast a spell each turn, not just your own turn and not just your first spell either, choose an opponent and they draw a card. Then you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and it gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this is resolved, you get to draw 2 cards. The way Ms. Bumbleflower is worded, she wants you to cast 2 spells on as many turns as possible. Each time you achieve this, one of your opponents gets to draw 2 cards, or two of your opponents get to draw 1 card each. You get to place 2 +1/+1 counters on one creature, or 1 +1/+1 counter on two of your creatures, and then however you divide it, that creature or those creatures gain flying. You then get to draw 2 cards. If you only cast one spell, or you cast 3 or more spells on a turn, you need to accept that you will be down on cards. Although this will give you +1/+1 counters, so it isn't all bad, it's not the optimal play. The optimal play is to cast 2 spells on as many turns as possible. Let's look at how the deck is built to win out of the box. The standard deck is built in such a way that it's designed to be fairly mid-rangey with a variety of cards that can win you the game in different ways. Psychosis Crawler leans into you drawing lots of cards and damaging all of your opponents as you do so. But if you just rely on Ms. Bumbleflower to do this, including your draw for turn, you'll only be drawing 9 cards per round, and that's with casting 2 spells every turn, which is a huge ask on your mana base. Triskaidekaphile wants you to have 13 cards in your hand at the beginning of your upkeep, but they give you no maximum hand size, so you have to try and balance draw versus playing cards to reach the 13 card in hand target. While it's a tough ask, it is achievable. Ignore all the text. 20-toed Toad wants you to have 20 or more +1/+1 counters on it when it attacks, or you to have 20 or more cards in hand when it attacks. Either will win you the game. Again, the deck isn't set up to draw a huge number of cards, and the Toad itself only draws you 1 card on your turn if you attack with 2 or more creatures. So I think this is an ask to achieve as well. Bloodroot Apothecary has Toxic too and can cause your opponents to get poison counters when they sacrifice a non-token creature. This poisons opponents using treasures, food, clues, etc., but you aren't guaranteed a win from this card. Simic Ascendancy wants you to have 20 growth counters on it at the beginning of your upkeep, and then you win the game. You can put a growth counter on it any time you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. There are some useful creatures in the deck that can help advance this, and I think in some ways this is the best win con in the deck, but only if you manage to keep certain creatures like Forgotten Ancient or Chasm Skulker on the battlefield for long enough. Another major way to win is to put all your +1/+1 counters from casting spells onto Ms. Bumbleflower. Remember, she has vigilance and gains flying until end of turn when you put a +1/+1 counter on her, and she already has a fat body with 5 toughness. The idea here being to go down a Voltron-esque route and deal 21 points of commander damage to each of your opponents and win the game that way. I've mentioned this already, but I want to reiterate the point that in many ways the Ms. Bumbleflower deck is not a counters-focused deck. It has no hardened scales type cards for gaining extra value when placing +1/+1 counters on your creatures, and it has no proliferate cards like Throbbing Bird to help increase your +1/+1 counters on your creatures. Equally, there is no proliferate if you want to go down a toxic infect poison counter route either. You can build the deck in this way. It's very possible to go down that route. It's also possible to go down a token route and build a wide board to use to win the game. I have not gone down either of these routes, however. I have also stepped away from the group hug and gifting themes found in the deck you get in the box. I've done this to focus on ways to cast 2 spells every turn as often as possible, draw far more cards than expected and win with either alternate win cons, most of which the deck already includes, or by attacking with very large creatures. With that in mind, let's get into the changes I've made. First up, let's look at ramp. I've removed Coveted Jewel. It's sort of fun, but you don't want to be giving it up and you don't have a huge board presence to defend yourself from attackers. Zavala is just far too group huggy for my liking, so she had to go. Courtling Oracle is okay if you have it in your opening hand, but otherwise it's very much a dead draw. With a 1/1 body and no keywords, there are plenty of 2 CMC 1/1s I'd rather be playing. Rise of Flourishing and Girapur Orrery are both out of the deck as much for the same reason as Zavala. I'm stepping away from the group hug focus, and they give far too many resources away to my opponents for my liking. So what have I added? Bender's Waterskin and Victory Chimes are both 3 CMC, both coming untapped and untap on each of your opponent's untapped steps. While Bender's Waterskin, which gives mana of any colour, is strictly better of the two, if you want to be casting 2 spells on multiple turns, these 2 mana rocks are great ways to achieve that. In my budget upgrade short from as Bumbleflower, I recommended adding Alisay Levelure and Alphinaud Levelure, who we'll talk about in the next section. Alisay is a great blocker with 3 power and first strike and lets you go digging for Alphinaud, but it's her dual cast ability that makes her so valuable in the deck. Reducing the second spell you cast each turn by 2 generic mana makes your goal to cast 2 spells on multiple turns that much easier to achieve. She's also searchable with Alphinaud, so less stuck in the 99 than many cards we might want to play. Springleaf Drum has just had a fresh reprint in Lorwyn Eclipsed, and we are going to have creatures around that are constantly suffering from summoning sickness. Springleaf Drum helps us overcome this, letting us tap them for mana. You'll see why that's useful in a later section, but for now it's a useful ramp spell in this build. Now we're moving on to draw. Fisher's Talent isn't actually that bad. It provides extra draw and a 1/1 token if the card you look at before drawing is a land card, but it takes a total of 10 mana to get it to creating an 8/8 blue octopus, and I've moved away from token production in the deck. Not fully, but I have removed other token producers. There is a token production build here if you want to go down that route, and that's the great thing about Magic. Often there's no set best solution to building a deck for a particular commander, but I'm looking at a different strategy with this build. Sphinx for 6 mana is a 5/5 flyer that lets you draw 3 cards when an opponent draws 1. It's a bit uninspiring for 6 mana, and I found something better to replace it with. And then there's Jolly Gerbils, which needs significant more gift support in the deck to be good, and I've removed a lot of that already as well. Quain I think is uninspiring and gives too many resources to everyone, which advances your opponent's games at no cost to them. Secret Rendezvous does pretty much the same thing, and there are better draw spells we can use out there. I love Mr. Foxglove, but please remove him from the deck. His ability doesn't cast the extra creature, so he doesn't help advance the cause for Mrs. Bumbleflower, and he really deserves to be built in his own deck. Intellectual Offering has some interesting political shenanigans you can achieve with it, but its 5 CMC is a bit too high to be leaving open if you want to be casting multiple spells on other players' turns. Tent with Bunnies is as much about token generation as drawing cards, and while a fun group hug and thematic card, it's not what the deck needs. So what have I added? Fathom Mage. Whenever you cast a spell, Ms. Bumbleflower lets you put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. Let that be Fathom Mage, as every time you do this, you'll draw a card. Unagi is 5 CMC for a 5/5, unlike the Sphinx's 6 CMC. Sure, it doesn't have flying, but it does have flash and ward, waterbend 4 protection. Crucially though, whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, we get to draw 2 cards. Cast 2 spells with Unagi and Ms. Bumbleflower in play, target the same opponent to draw 2 cards, and on the second cast you'll be drawing 4 cards there too. That kind of asymmetrical gain is very much in my game plan. Speaking of such things, Sunstar Lightsmith also draws you a card when you cast your second spell each turn, and they get a +1/+1 counter to boot. The Council of 4 may be 5 CMC compared to Quain's 2 CMC, but it's all upside for you. If a player draws 2 cards a turn, you draw a card. A player, not one of your opponents. So if you get to draw 2 cards with Ms. Bumbleflower, the Council lets you draw a third. If you cast 2 spells, or indeed if any player casts 2 spells, you also get a 2/2 Night creature token. That's plenty of upside from where I'm sat. Alphinaud I've already mentioned, but they let us draw a card when we cast our second spell each turn. They are very much included because Alisay is in the deck and they can fetch her from your library. However, if I found something that does a better job than what they do, I would be tempted to remove them. Rashmi, on the other hand, was my pick to replace Mr. Foxglove. It lets us draw a card when we cast our first spell each turn, and if that card has a lesser mana value, they let us cast it for free. That would trigger him as Bumbleflower because it's a cast and we'd get to draw 2 more cards. Although we do have to let our opponents draw some as well, it's still a huge upswing in our favour. I've already mentioned that I'd removed some of the primary token generators in the deck. Octomancer is only good if we have an opponent creating creature tokens each turn that are worth copying. Hoofprints is just expensive and a bit slow, and we need our mana for casting cards every turn. Jorel isn't bad and you'll get a fair number of 2/2 cats out of her, but the 6 CMC pump ability really wants you to be focused on a token production deck, and when you're ready, go very wide and very big. All 3, however, are history. Next, let's look at removal. Martial Impetus is just unnecessarily complicated, or I've replaced it with an aura that does similar but has flash so can be cast on an opponent's turn. Realm Cloak's Giant is, because we have no giants, a board wipe that kills our commander and some of our valuable key play pieces with no upside. Sure, it's a 7/7 giant with vigilance for 7 CMC, but that CMC is far too high for a deck trying to cast lots of cheap spells. Little and often is this deck's mantra. Finally, I don't want to give my opponents a 3/3 elephant if I don't have to, and I don't, so Generous Gift is gone. Lorna the Third Path I like, but she's a little too group hug for my style, and an offer you can't refuse is a cheap counter but doesn't do a lot to advance my game state, just protect it, when I can do both with other spells. Looking at what removal I've added, Ang's Iceberg has flash, exiles are permanent, and if it's possible it may be removed, you can sacrifice it by tapping 3 creatures to scry 2. Path to Exile is Path to Exile, I couldn't not add it to be honest. Parting Gust either bounces one of our own creatures, possibly to avoid removal, and then they re-enter at the end step with a +1/+1 counter on them, or you get to exile an opponent's creature and replace it with a tapped 1/1 fish. Far more palatable than a 3/3 elephant. Okay, it doesn't target permanents, just creatures, but it gives us options, and the iceberg does target permanents, so I have that covered. Here we go with a first look at part of the changes to the deck to make it possible to cast multiple spells on multiple turns. Unwind, snap, and rewind all untapped lands equal to their mana value when they are cast. If you are clever and have lands in play that tap for 2 mana, you can temporarily ramp using these to further the deck's goals. Now, I may be wrong with this, but I am not ever going to give an extra turn to my opponents. Sorry, Perch Protection, you're out of here. The deck we are building is not fast and will not have a significant board state, so we need some ways to control the game. Now, there are more stack style white cards out there you could choose to add to the deck, but for now I've chosen to add Blind Obedience and Authority of the Consoles to slow down those hasty aggressive decks that I may come up against. Dog Umbra I added as it has flash and can save Miss Bumbleflower from being destroyed. It can tie up an opponent's creature, but I think it's more likely to be used as commander protection. So far I've removed a fair number of cards and not replaced all of them, so that I can add 7 creatures with 2 CMC or 3 CMC that all have flash and will either bounce themselves or another creature back to my hand. The idea being to either repeatedly cast and bounce the likes of White Mane Lion, who will bounce themselves to get 2 cast triggers a turn I'm after, or use cards like Chwinga and the Deputy to bounce each other to achieve the same result. Fleetfoot Panther, while a little more expensive than White Mate Lion, can bounce itself. Stonecloaker can return itself as well, and also provides us with a little bit of graveyard hate. Quickling is simply another 2 CMC creature that needs to bounce another creature, and can serve to work with the Deputy or Sunpearl Kirin. As a note, I don't think I'd be likely to return a token with Kirin's ability unless I need to use Sunpearl Kirin to start the chain. Playing Sunpearl Kirin first, bouncing a token and drawing a card, then casting Quickling, for example, bouncing Kirin, then casting this, then Quickling, then this, etc. These 7 cards represent the main way to get Ms. Bumbleflower cooking with gas, as they say. I also removed Peerless Recycling. I do like it, but I needed the room, to be honest. Bloodroot Apothecary needs to be in a Golgari poison deck, or a Traxxas, or Hazel, or Chatterfang. There are many homes for them, but this isn't one of them. I have, however, added Approach of the Second Sum. Given the number of Alt-Wincon cards in the deck, this one is conspicuous by its absence. You're drawing an unhealthy number of cards with this deck. Play Approach, draw 7 cards, play Approach, win the game. You even have counterspells to help prevent it being countered on its first or second cast. Finally, I did change up the mana base a little. I recognise you could spend a lot of money and time overhauling the mana base to make the deck really sing, but the changes I made had a purpose and weren't too expensive. First up, gone on 1 of each basic land, leaving only 9 in the deck, which I appreciate is a bit low. Next, I don't like the thriving lands. Keeping track of counters on lands is an admin task I can do without, so they're gone as well. I also replaced Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse with similar cards that I'm sure are strictly better. I added all 3 bounce lands, I think they are called. They come into play tapped and bounce a land to your hand, but then subsequently tap for 2 mana, which works well with this deck's play pattern. I'm pretty sure Fabled Passage and Tranquil Landscape are both strictly better than Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. Tranquil Landscape can tap for colourless, can be cycled, and if you want to, it can be sacrificed for a basic forest, plains, or island. Fabled Passage works like Evolving Wilds, but if you already control 4 or more lands, the land you fetch doesn't come into play tapped. Finally, I added Mistrise Village, and I confess this is purely to cast Approach of the Second Sun twice uncounterable, so add it or not at your leisure. And that's all the changes I've made. There are cards like Palinchron that cost quite a lot of money I'd like to consider adding in the future, and even trying to make it go infinite to win the game. But in testing, I like how the deck plays now. You draw obscene amounts of cards, have some fat creatures to defend yourself with while playing towards trigger whichever win con you've chosen to attempt. It's like having your own series of side quests built into the deck. If you want to check it out, the link to the deck on Architect is in the description, and a link to all my Architect builds is in my profile. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my take on upgrading Ms. Bumbleflower. If you had, I'd be jumping around like a rabbit myself. If you'd like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I hope you always draw more than your opponents.